Welcome. These will be my thoughts on 5 Days to Midnight, Episode 4, Day 4. The episode, I want to say, is probably rated TV-14, so this video be. There will be spoilers for these first 4 episodes and another episode I love, and I'm going to touch upon it right here at the start. No, looks like there's not going to be videos from me on episodes 2 and 3. I should have checked the disc better. I could watch the first 7 episodes of episode 2 and absolutely nothing of episode 3. So I checked to see if there were streaming options. I wasn't willing to pay, but maybe it was free, but it apparently right now does not even stream in Denmark. So yeah, I'll briefly talk about, so in the first 7 minutes of episode 2 is when he gets the green Jeep, I think they call it. And there is a very adorable moment where, as soon as Jessie is aware, oh, there's a car out there and it's ours, she gets in, she finds the radio, as he notes, and, we see her dancing in the car seat as he realizes this is the car that, he has when he is, when he dies Friday. And it is a really strong contrast between, he's seeing the car, which is an omen of his impending demise, and he sees her, and leaving her an orphan is one of the worst things he can imagine, one of the main reasons he wants to survive these 5 days. So that's very effective, and I think that is essentially all I'm going to say about episode 2. I will admit, I did consider looking up like summaries of episodes 2 and 3, but this is not really what I want to do for these videos. So we're going to go directly into episode 4, which I will say does open with such a strong previously on that I can easily follow it. Like without that previously on, it would definitely be difficult. But yeah, so let's see. I think the first scene was very moving. He's recording the final will and testament, and he notes that Dan and Brad and Chantal, not Dan and Jan. It just stuck with me. Dan's the doctor. Dan and Jan. That's like, yeah. Sometimes they say opposites attract, sometimes it's people with names that rhyme. Brad and Chantal cannot have Jesse's trust under any circumstances. And I think it was Dan, was it Dr. Dan who's, and maybe Jan, who's, probably was Jan, who is supposed to take care of Jesse. And yeah, so having not watched the entirety of episodes 2 and 3 in years, I don't remember for sure, but I think part of the idea with the show is like the 5 stages of grief, 1 per episode. But although I guess this one would be acceptance, which I think is the last one, although, learned from the take, it's not really, it's not always the case that it goes like that. Anyway, that brings us to let's see, I think the next thing was Jesse finding the case and, of course, very quickly realizing the password. They really shouldn't have made the password. And I jest. It was meant to be opened by at least JT. And that's one of the acting moments that I was remembering for Gage Golightly. It's possible there's also stuff in episodes 2 and 3. And, she's never bad in episode 1. She's just not asked to do quite as much. But here, she's seeing the case, and taking it all in, and she is realizing that he will die if nothing changes, and she is accepting the truth of the material in the case, but rejecting the idea that it is impossible to save him. And also just having to act, at age 10, the realization of, you know, losing one of your parents soon. And she was already doing a great job acting like she hadn't had her mom, ever. So yeah, really, really impressive. And then she gets a genius montage, which I don't think I made this reference when JT did it in episode 1, but it does give Sam Raimi a little bit, like, his Peter Parker figuring out the suit. I think it is, and it's been a while since I watched Spider-Man 1, but yeah, something like that. Or something from Darkman, working on the skin. But the yeah, so I'm trying not to repeat what I said in about episode 1 in my video on that. So as usual, love how cheesy the show is. And I think the next thing is, yeah, so he realizes she found it, and they talk about it. And again, just really, really great stuff. And you get a sense of where he is, yeah, he genuinely is not sure that he can actually change things, but she encourages him, and he decides, well, if he takes away everyone's motive, then he will definitely, and let's see, I think that's when we see Claudia prepare for Roy, getting the oh wait, no, yeah, that there's a little bit between, so let's see. I think, yeah, the very next thing might be when JT drops Jesse off at school, and yeah, she's of course reluctant. It's yeah, understandably so. And again, I love the way that it's clear he's doing what he can to be a good dad. He doesn't yell at her over the case, even though this is something that he didn't want her to do. Because he appreciates that, right now she needs to process, or it's possible she's already processed it, but, the contents of the case, but this is not a yelling at, later he is almost yelling at her when she skipped school, but then once he understands why, again, because, like, she's not doing it because she's selfish. She's doing it because she believes she can save his life. That is the definition of selfless. She's putting her own life on hold. She's delaying her education in order to save his life. And I think that brings us to, so Claudia, yeah, there's the thing about, hey, Claudia, can you take Jessie to school? Is she ready? 5 more minutes. Which, and she's like, well, that's too long. Well, sometimes when you say 5 minutes, that's not what it means, so fair enough. But no, seriously though, that really underlines, yeah, there's something going on. How could she possibly not wait just 5 minutes? And so he goes to the cop and explains, he's taking away the motives, and we don't know yet what he's gonna do with Carl. We already know for Brad. And he also mentions Roy, and yeah, like, we know that's got to be, and this is made even more, like, explicit in episodes 2 or 3, but like it's easy enough to deduce, yeah, he is going to, like he and Claudia had a conversation about Roy, and now, he knows that there's some, yeah. Let's see. I think that brings us to the right. There's also a couple of lines that help fill it. There's the thing about the information on Claudia in the briefcase. That's from the future. I mean, unless that's like the thing about how she wasn't at the funeral and how she's a suspect. Otherwise, I really don't know what it would be. So I guess it's possible they faked something, or maybe there was something that wasn't quite revealed in episode 1. But yeah, with just that little bit of dialogue, I'm like, oh, okay, sure. I have absolutely no problem accepting that. And without that line, I would have been like, well, what is he being shown? Because I didn't watch episodes 2 and 3 recently. Anyway, I think that brings us to the... So yeah, she goes and she picks up the folder, and she's being very secretive about it. And, we see she's got a a gun. I'm not scared of bells. I guess maybe Fox News is. But the, yeah, the let's see. What's the other thing? Yeah, should we get some more of that little trick to, cheap trick to increase tension. Frames keep on skipping into the future. And, she gets out of the car. The camera makes a full 360. And now that she knows that at least some percentage of the audience is at least mildly dizzy, she can proceed. But I think that's when we see Jesse leave the school. And let's see. Right, it was also great that it cuts from Sarkowski saying, she's your weak spot. You don't even know where she is. It's the people closest to us. And I believe the stat he gives is true. 7 out of 10 people are killed by friends, family, someone they know. I'm not saying, it's like that South Park episode. Obviously, I'm not saying you should constantly mistrust everyone in your life, but a lot of people have an undue amount of anxiety around people they've never met. And that's something that sadly worsens our ability to help each other when we need it. If you encounter someone you've never met who's in need, obviously there might be a certain circumstance under which, but if you think you can help them, yeah, try to do so. Anyway, moving on, I think that brings us to the part where, so yeah, he calls Roy and says, or yeah, calls and leaves a message for Roy. Leaves the phone number, which I hope they picked one that wasn't being used by some regular civilian, because that person probably got a ton of calls after. Now, I think that brings us... Right, and we also have, so Jesse goes to talk to I'm afraid I forget his name, but the Giancarlo Esposito character. It's still so surreal to me to see him play a role so different from some of the other stuff I'm familiar with he's in, and just, yeah. But he really nails it. Like, he's so... He feels like someone you... Like, when you see Jesse approach him, you're not like, oh no! You're just like, oh yeah, he's and as soon as he's like, well, was it like, there's something about, aren't you supposed to be at school? I found something even more important. I want to hear about it. Like, I believe him. I believe that he really wants to, and yeah, he does not know if dogs go to heaven. I mean, funerals. But she goes to the graveyard and sits at her mom's grave, which it's really nicely done. Like, I do appreciate how utilitarian a lot of stuff in this show is, because she is grieving is also part of how she, like, hypothetically, if someone walks up and asks, what is a little girl doing at a graveyard by herself? She's going to be like, my dad doesn't have time right now, but this grave's my mother's. This is, a few days after the anniversary of her death. I never met her. What kind of jerk is then going to be like, well, get out? Like, they might be like, okay, just, you know, do you have an adult you can call if you need help or something? Is this within walking distance of your home? Are you going to be okay? Or maybe even stay and watch from afar or something, but they're not going to just like kick her out. So she, and in addition to that, it accomplishes that she sees that the dog Boomer will live. And the grave also reminds of JT's potential, soon death. That's not grammatically accurate. And I think and the relief on her face when she sees the dog. Which, like, honestly, seeing a dog always makes my day. So I think that brings us to the part where, JT gets the call that, Jesse wasn't at school, and he also gets the call about Roy. So McFadgen did not appear in the first episode, and I wish I could watch, clearly he appears in at least one of the two episodes that I missed this time around, but I am quite the fan of the McFadgens. I have never been unhappy when they appeared in something, and this is no different. Grammar is not my friend today. In my defense, I have not been awake for that long as I record this. Getting back treatment hours from now, so recording now rather than tonight as I usually do. Right, for those who don't know, after chiropractic back treatment, it can be good to rest your back for, a little while. Anyway, I think that brings us, for me personally, I don't know, less than 36 hours. Yeah. 30-ish hours, I guess. Let's go with that. Yes. So, the next thing was so he goes to meet Roy, and, right, and that's what, yeah. So he goes there, he gets the gun, and, he leaves without Claudia, which was clearly not what she was anticipating, yeah. And he finds himself at, he's asked to go to THX 1138, buck naked, and, yeah. I thought it worked really well. We're so close to the finale, where supposedly he will die, and yeah, we're getting flashback. He's gotten this close. The car with the blue parka, and now the place. So he goes there, and I thought they handled it fairly well. Like, ultimately, they didn't need to have it happen at a club like this, but the camera didn't linger too long on the dancers. It tends to be like background, and not even for that much. Like, there's not a huge amount of running time devoted to that. And I did appreciate the part where one of them points a gun at, a toy gun, and obviously toy gun has got the red bit at the tip and everything, so that cops don't shoot. Although, if you're a black child, they might still. But let's see. I think that was the Yeah, because she thinks she's being like playful, and he's not loving that whole motif right now. I think that brings us to yeah. So the lucky for him that Roy showed up, so he doesn't have to drink both drinks himself. And Roy just throws the paper on the floor and pulls a barrier and asks an underling to pick them up. But yeah, he's not accepting it, and he's like, you were supposed to bring Claudia, and you're gonna trick her into meeting me, so she'll never want to see you again. And if not, I will make the prophecy come true. And I do appreciate that they gave him the biggest handgun, like literally, that's a Desert Eagle. That is the biggest, most powerful, yeah, they someone did their job right there, because that's the kind of attitude that Roy should have. Don't give him a small, subtle gun. And let's see, yeah, just JT comes close to shooting him. Sikorsky comes in just in time, but internally we don't hear it, but clearly JT was doing the to be or not to be monologue, soliloquy. Right, and I actually just realized I forgot about so Carl. That was also some really great stuff. I don't know if Hamish Linklater always plays a complete freaking weirdo, but I'm here for whenever he does. Like this and Legion, like they're two very different characters and performances, but he is sufficiently like odd in both, and he just hits it out the park. And but yeah, you have the thing about he claims that it's the blood test, but he already got the results, and he gets he gets Carl committed, and Carl doesn't help matters by saying, "You're going to destroy the universe. I'm glad you're going to die." That's I mean, he doesn't say those words exactly, but anyone within earshot who knows that he's being committed because he's saying that this guy is going to die soon because of like fate, they know that that's what he's saying. And even without that, still the universe is gonna And the as a nerd, I quite like the thing about so what exactly is gonna happen? Like gravity's gonna you know cease to exist. Well, yeah, if you don't believe in fifth dimensional gravity. Carl, I think we can be friends. But I think yeah, and that's also when JT tells, wow, a lot happens in just one episode. I guess I already mentioned that in my video on episode 1, but yeah, so he talks to and Dan says he already talked to Brad, and he's just not believing this, and he thinks JT should be committed, which like we can appreciate from like yeah, we can understand, but at the same time, it's like, I mean, we don't want that for the show, because we're watching to see him figure out, how he ends up shot and try to prevent it. He can't do that from within this facility, but we can also, we get why Dan thinks it's the right thing. I think, let's see, what was the next thing then? Yeah, and not long after we see Carl escape, and I will say that felt a tiny bit like I'm all for this. I'm not asking for a documentary. It would be silly to make a documentary about time travel before we've perfected it, but I really, really don't buy that he would be able to just keep the door from closing like that, and then at the guy not notice. It just felt like there should have been something slightly more there. Like let's see, there's that thing about if you like put a coin in front of the and not the yeah, the some automatic lock things, you can block it, but the door will still close. Because as it is, the door didn't close all the way, and I feel like that the guy would have noticed that, you know. I guess it's possible he took his hands off the handle and let, you know, let's see, it's not inertia, it's the opposite of inertia, I think. That thing about, you know, objects in motion want to stay in motion, tend to stay in motion, something like that. Anyway, yeah, but yeah, and Sarkovsky gets the call, you know, Carl escaped and is, you know, and it's that thing of like, yeah, it looks like he really is. I think they're doing a really great job. I do remember the answer. I'm not going to give it away here, but by the end of this episode, yeah, it's like maybe Carl really is behind it, but maybe he's just like, he's clearly obsessed. But I mean, if your personal hero said they were going to die soon and had proof from the future, I think a lot of us would become obsessed with it, you know? So, yeah. And I think that brings us to the... Right, and I do also appreciate... I wish I could comment on it more, because it is a fascinating idea. But yeah, he tried to save uh, Brandy something, or was it Mandy? And Andy? Candy. And the, you know, he saved her in the first situation, but then she died in another. But as Jesse points out, originally the dog also died and did not die this time. So it is possible to save at least some people. Is she calling her dad a dog? Moving on. And I think that brings us to the part. Yeah, so there's also the confrontation where, you know, talk about money with Brad, and you know, he's convinced that JT loves that Brad is losing, you know, and that is sadly, there are a number of people under capitalism who end up thinking, oh, you know, people who say they care about me really want me to fail. You know, it's yeah, capitalism does terrible things to our brains, and alternatives are, you know, I'll let you do your own research. But the let's see, I think, yeah, so, you know, he goes to, right, it was also very nicely that, you know, so JT you know, tells Chantal, you know, it's sort of a careless whisper, it's just loud enough for Brad to hear. You know, it's something like he's losing it, or he's out of control. And then Brad says, we'll get back what we had and more. And that is obviously meant to be reassuring, but it's also like, what are you going to do to make that happen? And, you know, it sounds desperate. And it's also like, you know, I understand not wanting to accept the situation, but it's a little bit intense to say, you know, like, hypothetically, if I were in that same situation, I would say, we're going to be okay. We're going to find a way to make this work. But yeah, not long after right, and yeah, so Jesse throws out the parka and the other clothes, and, you know, right, yeah, and that's also when she talks to Claudia, and, you know, I really love that there's, you know, again, a lesser show would have Claudia be like, you can't do that. That's your father's, you know, but she understands why. You know, she wasn't supposed to see it. Jesse didn't realize she was in there because she was in a hurry. But the thing she asks is, if my dad does die, will I ever see you again? Because she really does get, you know, they do care about each other. And Claudia asks, and it's obviously not exactly what Jesse wants to hear, but sometimes, you know, there are times, I appreciate, there are times where parents have reason to not tell their kids the truth. I hate it. I hated being lied to by my parents. But this, I do definitely think, is a time where the truth is the right, you know, like, imagine if she said, sure, we will, and then, you know, within like 30 hours, the situation is changed, and it's, yeah, she says, I don't know, because on the one hand, she hasn't adopted her, and there's not time to go through that entire process. She's not kin, and that's a really messed up situation. Like, there's so many cases in the real world where someone would be so much better off if custody was granted to the partner, or that this is also part of why gay marriage was so important. There's so many, because they can adopt, obviously, if they are, and if they're lesbians, they can use IVF, unless Republicans ruin that because they're just petty. Like, do you want more kids or don't you? But yeah, that means that yeah, for a number of couples, gay couples, they end up adopting, and that might mean there's no DNA, in common, right? And also, yeah, right. Even if one of them is, shares DNA with, is the parent, if the other one isn't, and if they're gay, yeah, they it would most likely only be one of them. If they're not married, that person might never get to see that kid again, and that kid might end up in the system. And that's, according to a number of Republicans, apparently better. It's better for that kid to be, like, it's important to note, not everyone who goes through the system ends up suffering. But in countries like America, where it is not prioritized, yeah, a lot of them do end up really suffering. And yeah, and another part of what Claudia is saying is, of course, I mean, what's Roy gonna do? Like, if yeah, so really, really powerful scene. And yeah, Carl shows up, gets the clothes and the case, and yeah. And I thought they handled it just right with Brad, because it's this thing of, like, I mean, Carl is tiny, but Brad is like middle-aged, so I genuinely was not sure who's gonna win this struggle over the case, and they're equally determined. Both of them think this is life or death, and yeah, Carl ends up using it as a weapon rather than a tool to build. And I love that there's like a second or so where we're not sure. And, I mean, it's hard to read from Carl's face. And I'm also not confident he knows immediately, but, it's already a lot that he was willing to hit another human being with a heavy object like that in the head in order to accomplish anything, even something that is obviously so important. But for like a second, we're not sure if it killed Brad, if Carl became a murderer for this, and that is the thing. Like, JT almost becomes a murderer of Roy. So it is this thing of, and Claudia was the one who readied the gun. So it is genuinely, like, it brings to mind, like, what will we do to save, like, several of them think they'd be saving JT's life by ending another's, and Carl thinks that he's saving the whole universe. And I really appreciate that it's given weight. There's so many pieces of American media, and I love many of them, I will admit that, where someone killing someone else is not really given the weight that it should and that it does in real life. There's a lot of people who never recover if they take a life. They go for decades just carrying that pain. Violence should always only ever be the last resort. I'm not saying it's never necessary. It was necessary to use force to stop the Nazis in World War II. And I already mentioned I'm in favor of gay rights, so it's not going to surprise you when I say that Stonewall also needed to happen. Shouldn't have needed to, but did. but a lot of the time, violence just perpetuates more violence. And so far, violence doesn't really solve problems on this show. I suppose, again, I can't say for sure about episodes 2 and 3, but, it just makes the situation worse for Carl. Now he's like, I mean, before they were like, well, escape mental patient, we should keep an eye out. Now he's a violent criminal. So and some people are going to say, well, they both struggled. Yeah, but like, it's not his property though. Like, if one of them has any claim to that, it would be Brad, not Carl. And Carl broke in, he B&E'd to get it. So, yeah. Let's see. And I think probably also Brad claimed that, no, like JT changed his mind. He told me he wanted to have it. And they're going to believe him because he's respected over a mental patient who just escaped, So, yeah. That's another thing. We really have to get better at listening to people who struggle with their mental health. And I think I appreciate that sometimes there is such a thing as hallucination and such. But if what they're saying doesn't, if it makes at least some sense, if it doesn't sound like hallucination, yeah, we should try to believe them. And I appreciate it can be difficult. I myself have struggled with this. I have talked to some people who struggle with their mental health, and everything they said, I tried to weigh against, does this sound reasonable? And, obviously every case is unique and individual, but I personally found that most of what they said made sense. And yeah, there were times where they said something where I was like, I wish that wasn't true, but I can't rule it out. So, yeah. Let's see. And, if you're checking, if you're talking to the person they talked about having done something, don't automatically trust the other person more just because they're not struggling with their mental health, or it hasn't become clear yet, because some of the time we don't know that someone's struggling with their mental health. Yeah. And the episode ends in, the wonderfully designed set where we see all this obsession with, he's written all these formulas, and he's got multiple printouts of different parts of JT's face, and he's stacked them in this way that makes it look slightly uncanny and just wonderfully done, because, like, as mentioned, like, you could read this as, well, he's investigating, like, sometimes this kind of stuff can look off-putting, but also like, this is a lot. And it also makes perfect sense that they didn't discover this until now, because now he's a mental, healthcare patient. Did I say escaped? I meant to, at least. And yeah, of course they're gonna check his home, and they, I figure JT probably said that, he might be violent, and he also struggled as he was being dragged off, and even when that is, like, obviously he thinks that the universe is gonna, be destroyed in some way if he is unable, but what they noticed and wrote down, and that can really hound someone, is that he resisted, And I think that brings us, let's see. I guess that does lead nicely into, if you have Nebula or are considering a free trial or something. Lindsay Ellis made a video on, let's see, something like body cam footage as part of the title, and that, yeah, is in part also about, well, if you resist when the authorities come for you, that can, yeah. And I was very impressed by how, like, I've been following Lindsay Ellis for, like, I don't know, 15 years or something, so I wasn't surprised, but it is still very nice to be able to say it is not like this morbid, exploitative, you know, thing that a lot of people would have made about that subject. Yeah, I think that does pretty much. Yeah, and there's the thing about right. We also have yeah. I like earlier when it's like I'm not gonna die. It's only Thursday. I need to use that line, but the yeah, he notes if nothing changes, I guess I'm gonna die tomorrow. And then Sarkowski says today and shows the watch. Right, I did. I think I neglected to mention in my video on the first episode. I love the thing of running out of time. Need a timepiece because that's such a great. Because he is in the this future scenario that we're seeing. Yeah, let's see. What does that bring us? I think that covers everything in the episode. Wow, there's a lot. I'm gonna real quick mentally fast forward through the episode. Right. I love the thing, Roy, even as he's being dragged away, he's still threatening people, and it's a threat, I really appreciate it. He doesn't say, as soon as I get out, I will come after you, because that would be the worst thing to say in these circumstances. But he says, if I get arrested or if I get in jail, you're out of a job or something like that, which, like, depending on, like, yeah, some people can make that happen, so that's the kind of thing that might really, a cop, you know would really hate for that to happen, like, if he is no longer a cop, can he even still get away with shooting innocent people? And that's, like, such a big part of why a number of people become cops. And I don't know, does anybody still join ICE for any other reason than that?